Alrighty, Bowhunters, welcome back to another episode. Sitting here with return guest, Mr. Benny Salleras. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, mate. How are you?
I'm going very well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me again. I feel like this has been a long time coming. We actually said at the end of the last episode we are going to do it again, but that must have been 2 years ago or more that we had that conversation.
Yeah, I can't remember to be honest, but it would be. It feels like it feels like about 2 years ago, mate. Yeah, and it also feels like yesterday in some respects. It does. It feels kind of recent, but I would say about 2 years. Yeah.
When did Silent Pursuit start?
Technically, about 2 months before COVID, I think, which
Yeah,
was
because I feel like it
amazing
was
timing.
even before COVID that we had the talk. Like it was literally just as Silent Pursuits were starting. So
Oh, really?
I
That
think
long
that's
ago?
almost 4 years ago.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that long. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's gone too
It's
quick then.
gone. Yeah. Throw a pandemic in the mix and everyone gets time lost. Man, I mean, you've had a lot going on recently. Like, obviously, you've been traveling around for work, which you do quite a lot. You've always hunted around as much as you can. This year, you said that you haven't had as much hunting in, but right now, in particular, like the big hype has kind of been around the season and all of that side of things. Like as it's all been aired now, like obviously, that was when did you film that? 2020, 2021?
It was filmed throughout 2021. Yeah, the bits that I was involved in were sort of mid 2021, and I think Craig and the team did a bit earlier than that, and a bit later than that. But yeah, the vast majority was filmed in 2021. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
I'm kind of intrigued, like something like that in regards to the season where it's really, I haven't actually watched it yet, but my understanding is really bringing hunting into a great light and showing it to the rest of the world. How is it accepted on your behalf in regards to like, has anyone come up to you? Has anyone recognized you? Has anyone reached out to you on socials or anything like that? Like, does it have that aftermath that you kind of think it might or not really?
Absolutely zero, which is good. That's exactly what I was kind of hoping for. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's been no. I've had a few like people that I know, and definitely a few mates like give positive feedback, but
Hmm.
definitely haven't had any random messages or even any sort of spike in kind of following or anything like that. There's been no real. Yeah, it's just sort of passed pretty quickly. But the good thing is, and something I'm really pleased to share is that I had a chat to Craig Pringle, who's the spearhead behind the whole project. He's
Hmm.
um, the main cameraman and basically the coordinator behind the whole show, and he's a hunter himself. Craig, he's from down in Victoria, but he has not had one single negative
That's
comment
amazing. Yeah.
or threat or just absolute silence. No, only positive feedback, nothing negative
So good.
whatsoever, which really surprises me. I don't think there's too many conclusions we can draw from that really, but it's just really a positive thing to hear
Hmm.
and to report. You would expect that there would have been at least, especially going on to a platform like Binge, you would expect that there would be some kind of negative um, feedback or comments or death threats or something along those lines, but there's been zero. So that's pretty cool, I reckon.
Yeah, definitely. Because what happened with Meat Eater and Netflix? Do you know the story behind that? Was that them pulling or was it Netflix who pulled out? I don't know. I feel like there was some sort of attack that they went under, Netflix in general. So they kind of decided to cut contracts with Meat Eater, but I'm not definite on
Uh,
that.
I didn't even know that was. I didn't even know that had happened, mate. So I didn't even
Yeah.
realize it wasn't on Netflix anymore.
Well, it still could be. It might just be the later episodes, so the later seasons.
Oh,
But yeah,
okay.
it's interesting. Something like the season, I think it's not as quite in the limelight as something like Survivor or one of those like Alone or something like that, right? Where it probably does create a little bit more of like a mass following or something like that, where you're really focusing on kind of the certain few individuals. And so yeah, it's I don't know. It's kind of the outcome that I was expecting, to be honest. When you said not really, not in a
Yeah,
bad way at all. I think it's still going to shed great light onto what hunting is and why we enjoy it, right?
yeah, and I think like back in the early days when it was first sort of growing legs, we sort of had the feeling that it was going to be on a more standard free to air channel, like on Nine Go or
Yeah.
not necessarily Channel 9. It'd just be unrealistic to think that kind of a show would just be thrown straight onto a Saturday afternoon slot on Channel 9 HD or something like that. But the way it panned out with with going on to the real life channel on Foxtel and Binge, it's sort of, I think it's probably achieved a fairly good coverage, and the majority of people, like there's two completely different audiences here the way I see it. There's people who are into hunting that go, oh, there's a show about hunting that's being released, I'm going to watch it because I'm a hunter and I'm interested in hunting.
Definitely.
So a large percentage of those people would either have access to Foxtel or Binge, even if they just got the free trial of Binge and watched all the 8 episodes in 1 or 2 sittings. Like there was ways to view the show, and there was ways to do it basically for free if you're a little bit smart about it. But probably the far more important audience were the people who aren't hunters, who aren't part of our scene, who didn't know it was coming and didn't know it was a thing, who probably just found it by chance, or just saw it advertised, or just thought, oh yeah, this looks interesting. And they're the important audience at the moment. Is especially for a show like this, the important audience are the people who don't know much about hunting. They're probably interested in the outdoors, and they're interested in, I guess, adventurous kind of pursuits, but aren't necessarily hunters. And that's to me, that's the key role of that show is to really educate the uneducated. And that's really boils down to the only reason I ever decided to be involved with it. And initially I said no to Craig when he got in touch. I sort of thought, oh, I don't really like cameras, and I'm just not sort of, I don't really, what's the word? I'm not really that interested in limelight it didn't really float my boat, to be honest, to start with. When he started talking and Craig sort of told me what he was trying to achieve, that was the reason I really sort of said, yep, let's do this, is because I saw the potential that a show like that had in educating the uneducated. And to me, it's something that is really critical right at the moment, is that 95% of people in Australia, for example, who don't really have a solid opinion about hunting, and they don't really. There's a lot of people out there that could go either way. They could support us in one conversation, and then they could be against us in the next conversation, depending on which bunch of friends they're hanging out with that particular day or night. So to me, the opportunity to really show the truth behind what we do and who we are as modern hunters, it was something that I wanted to be a part of, and something that I wanted to. I'd rather be involved in it and have an input into it rather than sit back later and criticize it, which I'm sure there's plenty out there that are going to have things to say, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of critics out there, or people who have got the shits because they weren't involved in it or whatever, and that's just a normal thing in Australian hunting. But I'm glad with the final product. I'm really quite proud. Like there's things that could have been done better. And that's always going to be the case in anything we do. You always can look back on something and go, oh yeah, we could have done this or that or whatever, or said those words instead of these words. And
hindsight's a beautiful thing.
Of that, but overall, especially that last episode, I was like I've only watched each episode once so far. I just haven't had really time to go back and really assess things closely or anything. But that last episode, I was like, yes, we've nailed it. Like we've said the things that we wanted to say. We've had a good cross section of different characters. I think there was a good, just a good representation of different people with different backgrounds and different techniques. And I think there was a real cross section there, rather than just going and picking like the 5 most successful hunters in Australia right now and putting them on a TV show. That's not what it was about at all.
No, definitely not.
It was about stories and really showing that diversity behind who we are and what we do. And I think it was achieved. I'd be interested to hear what you thought. Like I haven't heard a lot of feedback really, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. To be
I
honest.
actually still haven't actually even watched it yet. It's on my list. I was actually still haven't actually even watched it yet. It's on my list. I was actually at Dylan's place last week, a week before, and they were talking all about it because they had some friends around for dinner, and the friends had just watched it too, and they were kind of giving their feedback and were saying how much they liked it. But yeah, it's been on my list. I've just, like you, kind of not made the time for it yet.
It's hard to make the time.
Exactly, yeah. You got to,
Dylan
like we were talking about before we
did
even
a
started
fantastic.
recording, you got to choose what you're going to do at certain times. So can't do it
That's it.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a very busy fella and you can't fit everything in. But yeah, Dylan and Kira, they did a fantastic job, I reckon. Like the way they spoke and the way they presented who they are and what they do and why they do it, I think was really, really well done.
Definitely.
The same goes for everyone that was on the show, really. I think everyone did a really good job. And like I said, there's probably certain little pieces here and there that in hindsight we could have done slightly better. But yeah, by and large, I think it was very well done. Yeah.
The crazy thing is, like, that's literally just how Dylan and Kira are. Like, going to their house, and I haven't watched it yet once again, but I can imagine the way that we had those conversations that night was very similar to how they probably would have presented. Like, they're just well spoken. They just love and thrive off of what they're doing with their block. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I kind of really relate it back to when I was young and watching the fishing shows that would do the fishing, that do the catch and then the cook, and like that sort of stuff it's all hunting is, right? It's the same sort of scale. It's just taking it to a different level, not a different level even. It's just showing that it is the same thing, and that's the great thing about what we do. But so many people have that hierarchy between fish and critters, essentially, or like, yeah, land-based animals, that it's different, whereas it's not. It's the same.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap. Um, yeah, at the end of the day, they're still animals with backbones and brains. And they both they all take a lot of effort and skill to capture in whatever form they get captured. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap. You're dead right. And fishing is just something that's been so much more popular per capita in the world, not just Australia but everywhere. It's but there's a lot of parallels there, mate. You're exactly right. Yeah, I think it gets a little bit more complex with hunting. There's more probably there's probably a little bit more going on, I think.
Definitely there is.
When you start exploring the kind of the trophy side of it, and the I guess the differences between the species and the habitats they live in, and the regions they inhabit. I think it gets a bit deeper. There's a bit more breadth to it, I think, with hunting. But yeah, definitely a lot of parallels. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also a lot more videos on small animals, not so many on fish, right? Like Finding Nemo, Little Mermaid, they're kind of the two only ones versus a lot of your other ones, I think. And
yeah, that's true.
And that definitely plays a massive part in it, right? Like that connection. And I remember, for instance, I put a photo up of a deer that I got, and I put lots of meat photos up, and then there was one photo of me with the deer. I wasn't even actually gripping, grinning or anything. I was just behind him, giving him a pat, and someone hyped up about that. And then one of my friends, who's not a hunter or anything, he just jumped on. He was like, well, what would you think if this was a fish? Like, I'm sure you probably wouldn't be having a blow up about it. And she just went quiet from there. So it was pretty interesting, like, as a thing to bring up. Like, yeah, actually, you're very right. If there's a picture of me holding up a big old tuna, probably no one would care about it. But because it's a deer, it's just got different emotional connections to it. So yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. I've had a few different conversations recently online, people reaching out about what to do when you've hit an animal and it hasn't gone to plan. So obviously bow hunting, it's this thing where we do want it to be as fast and as ethical as possible, but sometimes it doesn't quite play out the way it's meant to. Whether that's because of nerves or whatever else that happens. I think realistically, some of these shots, even if it was with a rifle, for instance, you're still going to have a pretty bad outcome in the sense of the critter's hurt. It's going to go and bed down somewhere. And you've got the duty to go and finish the job, essentially. But within saying that, the question I have essentially is like, what situations have you been in and what have you seen, whether it's through yourself or through some of the guiding that you've done, where the shot hasn't gone as planned, and what sort of, I guess, what is your approach for taking care of that situation? my thoughts were always, and this is just from the conversation I had with the guy, was my thoughts are always that in bow hunting particularly, you want to try to get the second shot off as fast as possible. However, you obviously can't go and bump a deer. You can't, or not a deer, a critter in general. You don't want to bump it out of its bed wherever it's gone and bedded if it's bedded. So I'm just gonna, I'll give you the mic because otherwise I'll tell my whole story. So yeah.
This is it's a really good question to ask, and I think it's a topic that I just don't really hear it spoken about that much. I can't
exactly.
really too
I
many
think
other
it's
podcasts.
hidden, right? People are scared to talk about it because it does show the bad side of it.
Yeah, and it's it can be definitely seen as a bad side, and it's definitely something that needs to be communicated about in a thoughtful sort of manner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing is that with game, like, the first thing I want to say is we all aim for perfection, don't we? We aim for our goal is perfection when it comes to bow hunting, and particularly these days, like with the types of training that's out there, and the types of the mentoring and the podcasts like yours, and the Cayuga courses, and all of these things that are out there these days that are really providing good quality information to bow hunters who are on the learning curve. And really, we're all on the learning curve. No one's got it all figured out, and no one's perfect.
Correct. Yeah.
We're all on a learning curve, no matter how old we are and how many animals we've shot. We're all still on a curve, and you are till you die with bow hunting. You never just get to a stage where you're like, right, I know everything now. It's certainly not like that.
What makes it so addictive, right?
Yeah, and we aim for perfection, and the reality is, just like most things in life, it's not always perfect. There are times when perfection isn't reached and it's not achieved. And with bow hunting, that can mean like, obviously perfection to me is shooting perfectly, shooting really well, and knowing the animal really well, and getting into close range and making an effective shot and putting it down in a matter of a few seconds. That's perfection. If that animal's down in 20 seconds, to me, that's as good as you can ask for. If it's down in 5, awesome. That's amazing. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens. But if that animal's on the ground dead in 20 seconds, you've done your job perfectly. You can't really 100%. Do much better than that. Even if you've got a perfect double lunger, or you've cut the top of its heart off, or whatever, you've done your job. But obviously, yep, there are times when you don't get it perfect, and that can either mean having to take certain steps to get in and get another shot, and to humanely dispatch it as quickly as you can and ethically as you can. And occasionally, it's going to mean a lost animal, and that happens sometimes. And it's going to happen to all of us at some point in our bow hunting careers. It's part of hunting animals with a bow and arrow. And our ancestors, if you think about the gear that our ancestors had and what they used to run around with in the bush, hunting the same mammals we do now around the world, you can just imagine how much of a thing that would have been for everyday life for the last 60,000 years. That was a thing that had to be dealt with every single day. That would have been a part of life, and it would have been very frustrating. Like, they didn't have 70-pound compounds shooting
not sharp broadheads
per second. Yeah, like, they didn't have that. They didn't have the gear we've got now. Even when I was in PNG the other day, I was up there for work, and I met a bow hunter who was a really fascinating meeting. We were out in the bush in a quite remote area, and we were doing some water quality sampling and monitoring, and by chance we had the media crew for our client there doing some filming. So we literally had the cameras rolling. My guys were doing their water quality stuff, and literally a bow hunter just walked out of the bush from behind us, straight into the shot of the camera, which was just crazy. And he just walked out with his bow, and they don't even have quivers. They carry the arrows in their hand. And I met him and had a yarn, and he could speak a bit of English and whatever, mostly pidgin English, but we had a bit of a chat, and he showed me his different broadheads. And like when I saw what he was using as broadheads, I was like, wow, this is quite amazing that this is still the design that we're still running around with. There's literally people closer to here than Brisbane who are still relying on a bow and arrow to go and get their food. And the technology they've got they've taken no notice of what we use. They're not using, like if you whacked a Cayuga old school on the front of those arrows, you'd be laughing. You'd be real dangerous.
Yeah.
But they're using like blades about nearly a foot long, like a bayonet, like an arrow sort of as
Big
long
old
as the bow
spearhead.
with a bayonet on the front, just spearing that into cassowaries and pigs and that. So like
Jesus.
a lot of what I'm getting to is like there's still people out there right now that are hunting with bows for just to survive, and they must deal with that sort of stuff, this sort of stuff, very regularly. Either hitting and losing, or hitting and having to track down and dispatch. So we do aim for perfection. We don't always achieve perfection, but that's what we aim for, and it's our duty to train with our bows and to train with our gear to try and get as good as we can possibly get with the gear that we've got.
I think the side to that is that you can't, it's so hard to train someone for a massive adrenaline dump, right? Like what happens when a critter's right there in front of them, especially, it's funny because the more you start to worry about antlers and teeth and whatever else, right? If you do start to really like that side of it, it brings even more pressure onto you. And I think it's pressure no matter what the animal is. And that's such a hard thing to train for, is when the adrenaline drops, how are you going to react? And you just don't know that, right? It's like those videos online where someone runs out in a clown suit as if they're like a killer clown, and the man like pushes his girlfriend into the clown and runs off. You're like, fuck, well, that's not a good person, is it? But at the same time, like how are you going to deal in that situation where it is essentially where your body is going to think it's life or death to some extent?
That's right. So you might be awesome on a target. You might have trained your ass off, and you might have been coached to a point where your archery and your shooting ability is absolutely world class. But there is a massive difference between shooting an arrow at a live animal in a real situation and shooting at a target. And I don't know anyone who's absolutely stone cold. I've got a few mates who are close to it, but I don't know anyone who's absolutely able to completely do exactly the same process that they can on a target when they're out in the field hunting animals. I'm sure they exist, but I don't know too many of them. It's a different world when you've got an animal in front of you, and that, like, dealing with that and getting used to that, similar to a lot of things in life, comes with training. It comes with time in the bush and practice. Like the more hunting you do, the more situations you're in, the more you're used to what you're going to get, and the better at it that you're going to get over time. Not only over the long term, definitely it is a thing over the long term, but I think what's really something that's important and that's probably not spoken about a lot is having that practice over the short term too. If you're someone who has access to hunting close to home, like even if it's just rabbits or foxes or something that's sort of more obtainable and easier to get access to and chase, if you've got something like that around home that you can sort of get to fairly regularly, I think that is a massive help in maintaining your bow hunting brain and your instincts and your hunting shooting ability. You're someone like me that has no hunting at home, and I've never even lived. I always seem to live in places where there's no hunting anywhere close by. It's just the way life has panned out. But I don't have any hunting close to home, and I never really have at any part of my life. So I sort of am more of a person who I only sort of have these hunts like a few times a year that I've got to kind of look forward to, and then I'll train for and get ready for. But I never have constant. I can't just go out on a weekend or go for an afternoon hunt or something like that. So I think that's a really valuable thing if you have access to that, is to utilize local hunting to just keep that hunting brain ticking over and those skills honed. But
I'm intrigued to ask, have you ever found like a regression with what you do essentially with bow hunting, in the sense of like Have you ever seen that the nerves come up more than before, or less than before, or anything like that? Like, do you feel that it's different each time?
No, I don't think there's been a regression. I think there's a linear. I think over your lifetime, there's just a constant linear improvement as you get more experience and you grow older and you grow more mature. I definitely know that I'm rusty sometimes when I walk out in the bush on the first day.
Mm,
If I haven't been hunting for 4 months and I just walk out into the bush chasing chital deer, for example, I'm rusty. I'm
yeah,
not just going to be out there. I'm not going to be real dangerous on that first morning. I'll feel dangerous, but then
yeah,
afterwards, I'm like, oh, probably should have done that or should have done this. And a bit of time, even a day or two, it comes
kicks back
back
in.
into play. Yeah,
Yeah.
you go righto. Like there's nothing like bush time
Mm,
to get you tuned in and back into that frame of mind. But yeah, what you mentioned about adrenaline, going back to the original question and getting back on track, I think let's just play a scenario where so you've pulled a shot and it's not bang on the money. It's not on the money. It's a little bit off, and it's not perfect. I'm not going to do it. It's probably a bit hard to do it in a perfect order, but I'll just, without going for hours and hours, I'll try to run through what I see, what I go through, or what I think about, and what my processes are when that happens. One of the very first things that's really important, and this definitely ties in with what you mentioned about adrenaline, is it's really important to try to get.
no. What's going on here? The
Well,
internet.
it sounds like a good shot, but
Mate, I'm going to pause you there
when,
because the internet just had a shit again.
oh no worries, mate. Yeah.
So no, we're still going, but so pretty much you just said as far as your process goes, and that's about where it cut off when you
Oh
start to
right.
think about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what I was saying was one thing that is really critical is to get a very accurate, clear idea of where that shot actually hit. It's
Mm-hmm.
really important information to know where that shot hit. And when you're hyped up, especially when you're a newbie or a young fella and you're just frothing really hard because you've just shot at an animal, it's very easy to get led astray and for your brain to imagine things. And if there's a mentor near you or someone who you look up to or someone who's like it's your father or someone who you kind of look up to, it's very easy to go and tell them a more positive story than what really happened.
Yeah.
But what's really important is getting that visual of where the arrow hit and then being honest with yourself and whoever you're with about where that actually hit. If you know it was too far back, you've got to say that because your mates are there to help you.
Definitely.
You're not always solo. You're often when it comes to a tracking job, more time, like the majority of times, you're going to probably have help. You're probably not going to be by yourself. You're going to be by yourself sometimes, but a lot of the time you're going to have help. So the more honesty you can give to your group and the people that you're with, the more it's going to help the situation.
Definitely.
So if you know you were too far back, or you know you were too low, or you saw it hit and you know where that hit, you've got to be honest with yourself about where it hit. It's good to be positive and good to be optimistic about what might unfold, but you've got to be honest about where that shot hit and share that knowledge. I think one thing that is a really hard thing to balance, and it's a really hard thing to probably train or read in a book or in a manual or something, or to learn in a training course, is there's a real skill to knowing in what situations you need to move quick and keep that animal in sight rather than just letting it run out of sight and then relying on the blood trail. It's not something that I could probably describe in a textbook sort of fashion. It's something that probably comes with your instincts over time in terms of what the species is, what the sort of country is. There's a range of factors that are probably just going through your mind in automatic mode when this situation happens. But
I would say kind of maybe
there are
some of the
cases
times,
when
yeah. Also, I'm sorry. I'll interrupt. I
yeah,
already have.
definitely Yeah, you go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say when it's like complete dead ground between where you are and where the shot was, essentially. So if you've got, for instance, you shot across a creek and you can get across the creek bed and up onto the other side and you can look over the edge, then that's worthwhile. If you've shot up a hill and they've run over the hill, it's worth running up the hill to try to get your eyes on. But yeah, you're right in that situation. Like if it's on a flat and you just start chasing after them, you're just going to scare the hell out of them.
That's right. So, and that's this is the next sort of really important topic that sort of let's bounce between the two because they kind of interrelate a little bit. You just touched on it then is the animal's adrenaline. So we're already dealing with our adrenaline, yours and mine and whoever's there.
Yeah.
But then more important than that is the animal's adrenaline, because that stuff is just magic juice that does amazing things for that animal. That juice is there to make that animal survive. That is the purpose of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that and if you give that animal a chance to get that boost of adrenaline, you might as well say see you later. So you can't afford to let that happen, no matter what the situation. You just have to do everything within your power to not let that animal know what's going on and to not get scared to a point where its adrenaline starts to kick in, because that just does things that just appear like that are almost biologically impossible. Like some of the things I've seen. I've got a million different stories, but I've seen things that you just can't even explain, and the only explanation was adrenaline.
Yeah.
And there's nothing else to it. So going back to what we're talking about, there's a real balance between keeping something in sight when you think that you need to, and keeping it in sight at a distance where you're not going to spook it. So that's coming down to how much sound you're making, what the cover's like, how crunchy the ground is, how much visibility you've got of the animal, and the wind, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still hunting, you're still managing what's going on in terms of the environment, but you've got to try and maintain that appropriate distance where you've safely got the animal in your sights and you can keep an eye on them. Because I'll tell you what, it's much easier to just watch them at a distance rather than try and blood trail them. That's a lot harder.
Definitely.
And obviously we have to do that sometimes, but especially pigs, if you can keep them in sight at a distance and just keep that little bit of visual contact, it's going to save a lot of time and a lot of drama and a lot of unknowns as well, because you've maintained that actual visual contact. So I think it's a thing that comes with experience, and I think it's a fairly instinctive thing, and I think it's I don't think it's probably not trained or talked about that often, because I think a lot of our training sort of comes from American sort of like bow hunting that happens in America, because that's where most bow hunting really happens each year. Let's face it, and they don't do that. That's not how they don't jump out of a tree stand and follow a whitetail deer. They just sit there. They'll sit there for an hour and wait, and that's just probably the best plan for that style of hunting. But the style of hunting we do in Australia, it's a bit more aggressive, and we're on the ground and we're spot and stalk. We're rarely in tree stands. So yeah, maintaining that visual contact is a key thing. And second key thing is not spooking the animal, doing whatever it takes to not spook it. And the ultimate scenario after a not perfect shot is to keep it in visual range if you possibly can without spooking it, watching it bed down, and then basically stalking it again into a range where you can take another shot and try and finish it with that second shot. And that often is the case, like it's often that's often the way things pan out, is you are able to, whether you've had to blood trail it for a little bit or like very meticulously blood trail and keeping eyes ahead and spotting it. And the next really key thing is getting in close enough and putting a finisher in there and getting the job done with that second arrow. That's really got to be the focus, is getting it over and done with that second shot. And if they're not fired up with adrenaline and they don't really know what's happened or what spooked them, which is often the case with bow hunting, as you know, they generally they don't know that you're there, or they just don't know what actually has got them. So generally you do get that second chance if you play your cards right. But if you don't play your cards right, it can turn into a shit show pretty quickly. Yeah,
Definitely. I had a pretty
and
interesting
that's what we
situation
need to
once.
avoid.
Yeah, I had a pretty interesting situation. I shot a boar in a creek bed, and he ran up along the pad that I was on, and I moved, and he turned and went the other way. And his blood trail up this hill was ridiculous. Like you know what the Cayugas do, the pilot cuts in particular. It's spraying. Like it was crazy the amount of blood that I saw up this hill. But I think what happened is essentially that adrenaline dump that he got from me moving was enough for him to just clot up, like because adrenaline makes blood clot. So he clotted up and he just ran and he ran. And I ran up the hill after him eventually. And I heard crashing over to the side. I never actually found him. I completely lost him. It was completely long grass. And I just, unfortunately, lost him. And I was talking to Lonnie Brockman about it. And he's like, man, there's a fair chance he did a complete loop and went straight back to the water because injured animals will typically try to find water or try to find like shade and cold to some degree. I never found his bones or anything like that, but yeah, it was an interesting concept and like it wouldn't surprise me. But the amount of blood that was there, like I honestly thought I'd just done a straight heart shot, and I don't know how he survived. Like it was crazy.
No, that's a perfect example. And look, there's cases. It even happened last week up in the NT. And one of the blokes up there, like it was hard to. He was a fairly new to bow hunting, super keen dude. He's got all the gear. He's been up to Cayuga and done the course. He's a really keen, awesome dude, and knows his stuff. He's learned a lot quite quickly, but it was hard to console him. He lost a buffalo, and it was hard to console him after pulling even a perfect shot. Like we got it on. I wasn't actually there, but the guide got it on film and everything. He nailed it. He smoked this buffalo with a Zot, heavy arrows, disappeared up to the Fletchers. You couldn't have put the shot in a better spot, and that buffalo got away. And that happens too.
Yeah.
Even sometimes when you do hit them perfectly, and you think you've done everything right, occasionally, for whatever reason, that broadhead just didn't do the job, and that animal gets away. And that's really heartbreaking when you know when you hit them where you want to hit them and they still get away. That's really heartbreaking.
Definitely.
So that happens too. So there's a lot of different variables, and we've just got to do what we can to minimize the variables, I guess, and go for the cleanest, quickest, most ethical kill. Another factor that's really, I guess, we probably should touch on is it's one of the bits of evidence that you're going to have after a shot is the arrow itself. If you can,
I was going to lead there, definitely,
and the blood. So in some situations, you're going to shoot and the animal's going to take off quick. Say it's not very open country and it's gone into thick cover straight away, and you've got no idea after 20 yards. It's you hear it run off, but you don't actually see anything because it's too thick.
Mm-hmm.
You can't try and keep it in sight, can you? You're going to be limited to blood trailing. So it's really critical to put some time into finding your arrow.
Yeah.
You don't find them all. Sometimes you might. It's always a hard thing to balance. Is how much time do you invest in looking for the arrow? You don't want to waste money. You don't want to lose a $25 broadhead, really, but also you really, in a lot of cases, want to have that evidence to know where it actually hit, because there are telltale signs on the arrow. Most people will have a pretty good idea of what they're looking at in terms of oxygenated blood versus deoxygenated blood, what the signs are of a gut shot or a shot through the digestive system, a fleshy sort of gristly sort of meat shot. Like there's a fair bit of evidence on that arrow.
There's a fair few infographics out as well. I've actually put some up on my page once before on Instagram. But yeah, it's really popular in America, I think, because of the whole whitetail sit in the stand and shoot. That's kind of one of the only bits of evidence they do have. So when they first get down to their arrow, that is one of the things that they're really big on doing, is just checking the arrow and seeing exactly how that shot did play out. And like you're saying, like, has it got bubbles in it? Because then it's probably a lung shot. Is it a green arrow that's smelly? Because then it's probably the digestive tract somewhere that you've hit.
That's right.
Yeah. Is it fleshy and fatty? Is that, you hit brisket or muscle or whatever else?
That's right. And it doesn't tell you everything, but it adds to the equation. So you sort of, you're immediately pulling this piece of information and that bit, and you're putting together a story. It's like a bit of CSI, like
definitely.
you're working out, your brain's working out what has happened here. And you want to try and use as much evidence as you can to try and figure out what the best solution is, because your brain's calculating at the same time. Your hunting brain is calculating, right, based on all this, like how is the animal likely to react? How much effort am I likely to put into this? If I think is this something that's going to be achievable? Is it a waste of time? You want to put in as much time as you can put in on a search. Like once you've hit an animal, you owe it to the animal to invest like a practicable and reasonable amount of time to search for it. But if you shoot a boar through the back leg and there's no blood trail, and exactly where you've shot it, and you follow it for a couple of 100 meters and you don't find it, you're not going to keep spending the next 2 days searching for that boar, are you?
No,
there comes a point where you go, right, it's over. I'm not. This is that. And a lot of the time with animals hit with a sharp broadhead, the good thing about arrows, it's a real I guess it's a real strong point in terms of the ethics side compared to the way a bullet works. A clean arrow wound, like a clean broadhead wound, seals up really nicely and cleanly. It's a clean cut. It doesn't matter if it's a 3-blade or a 2-blade. It's a clean, precise cut. And if you do shoot something through the leg or somewhere just silly through the skin or something like that, that animal's fine. It's just going to go and heal. They get far worse wounds than that just from fighting each other and just through their normal daily lives. Whereas a bullet, the way it just pulverizes everything in its path, that's not a wound that can heal easily. That's gonna turn into a nasty wound. Yeah. So there's a big difference. There's a massive difference in terms of the healing capacity of a broadhead wound compared to a bullet wound. But it's just a bit of food for thought. But the other thing that we should probably mention is the actual blood trail itself. And blood trailing is an art. It's an art that takes practice and training. And the only way you're going to get that training is by having to do it. And that's not only your own animals, but helping your mates out as well. Like over your life, you'll help a lot of mates. It's just something that's part and parcel. And that's when it gets really CSI is finding the tiniest specks of blood. And
this week on CSI Outback.
and you've got to be a bit methodical about it. Like it's amazing how our eyes can get tuned into the color red when we're in the bush, and when it's the heat of the moment and you're trying to blood trail something. It's amazing how tuned in our eyes get. I had a French fellow with me last week, and he hit a female buffalo a bit high, and we went through the very unfortunate process of we ended up losing Owen. He hit it too high, and it just wasn't a good enough shot to put it down. And anyway, during the blood trailing process, we invested half a day trying to catch up to her again. But I don't know if you've noticed in the bush, quite regularly come across some eucalypts drop a really red sap on the ground, and you'll be walking
that same thing. Yeah,
that really red kind of sap, and he kept seeing that and going, oh, and you could see his eyes lighting up when he'd see the red sap on the ground. But I kept having to say, sorry, mate, it's from the tree. But you do get really tuned into what's on the ground, and you do get very good at spotting blood. And I think you've got to. I think one of the key things with blood trailing is you've got to try and control the adrenaline and control the you've got to try and be methodical and really think about things and not let adrenaline get like take control of you.
Definitely.
One of the really key things is, if you have got 2 people, is you've really got to try and get in the habit of leaving one person on the last drop of blood. Always.
I was going to say, leave like some sort of trace or something. Like something else that I've seen people do is, or we've done it before, is take like the builder's tape where you can just dangle a little bit and leave it somewhere, or leave like some string or a meat bag or something there, just so you know where your last bit of drop was. Yeah,
something to mark the way. And yeah, either some sort of flagging or actually using a person to stay on that last drop, because quite often animals can change direction quite suddenly, and it can get so frustrating sometimes where you've been on a fairly straight path and then all of a sudden you just can't find that next drop of blood, and it can be really tough. But they can turn on a dime, and they can turn straight back on themselves. I've seen them stop and come straight back up the same trail and then veer off that trail. So you've got a double. You can't tell, but it's very difficult in that situation to work out that they've double backed and then gone off that original trail. So it's really serious detective work, and I don't have any particular, like, apart from making sure that you're marking that last point all the time, and flagging tape's helpful. The other thing that's really helpful is having a GPS app like GPS Kit running on your phone while you're doing it, because you can start to get a picture of where they're going.
Yeah,
because you can see it on a map, and like Lonnie said, it is a common thing for a wounded animal to go to water, particularly with like a gut shot, but they're not going to do it every time. So you can't just go, oh, he must have gone to the water. They're not. It can happen, and it does happen, and it's a thing that happens a bit, but it's not going to happen every time. So you've got to try and like, at least with a GPS app, you can see it'll never be a dead straight line. It'll always have a bit of a curve on it, and you can see roughly the topography, and you can make judgments about is he going uphill, is he going downhill. Like, if an animal's running flat out straight uphill, it's in pretty good health.
definitely.
Whereas if you can sort of see it doesn't want to go uphill because it's too hard. Well, he's in major trouble. So there's factors like that you can sort of look at and see on a GPS app that can be really helpful. I think in situations where like, I guess there's always going to be a little bit of variation in terms of the effort, the ratio of effort to, I guess, value, and I don't want to say like the value of the animal, but I want to say that in reality.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I know what you're saying exactly.
Yeah, in reality, there's going to be a difference if someone hits a 30-inch sambar
Versus a mob pig,
Victoria, with a liver shot or something that's just a bit behind the vitals, or a bit behind the lungs, compared to if someone shot a 30-kilo sow up in central Queensland when they were hunting rooster deer or something. There's going to be a difference in the effort that goes into the job.
Definitely. Yeah,
and that's the reality. I don't have any shame in saying that. That is reality. That's just how it works. And I think when in those situations where it is a really I think you've just got to be really optimistic and never give up is one thing I've noticed. I've seen some tracking jobs where we had given up and it was basically over, and that horrible feeling of sort of coming to realization that that this animal's got away, I've failed, or my mate's failed, or whatever, and just pushing that little tiny bit more at the end has led to the result. I've seen that so many times. I think that old saying, never give up, is a really important one to keep in mind.
I was going to say also taking a break, right? Like, sometimes, where I hunt in particular, up near Gympie, the grass, there's a specific type of protein thick or rich grass where it's quite red at the base, and so it's like red through into green, or green in through to red, and so you see it, you're like, oh, and you get that same excitement that your French mate was getting, right? Like, you get all pumped, you're like, oh, there's some more blood, but it's not the case. Versus I often find, like, when you kind of get to that point where you feel like you can't really see anything else, just have a break, mark your spot, have a little break, give your eyes that second just to recalibrate, and then go again. I've often found that works quite well as well. You just kind of give yourself 2 minutes before you go back into it, and it gives you a fresh start. That definitely helps. That's
it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Just to reset, and obviously there's a lot of adrenaline at this point, and it's not just you, it's your mates too. Your mates who are watching, say if you're hunting with 2 or 3 mates, or 1 or 2 mates, or whatever, they're not totally immune to the adrenaline of the situation as well. No matter how much hunting they've done, they're still zoned in on what's going on, and they're sort of a bit pumped up as well based on what's happening to you. So I think having a break and just you've got to try and think you've got to try and think practically and clearly about what's going on, and try your best to avoid making rash decisions, or rushing is the biggest thing, is rushing. If there's any, I've never seen an animal not found because people were taking their time too much. It's not going to lead to a bad result, is it? It's not. If you slow right down, like once you're in that situation where it's blood trail mode and you haven't got the animal in sight, you're best off really taking your time then, and really being methodical and taking your time. And when it comes to that point where you do find him and you're sort of gearing up for that second shot, that's when you really, really want to slow down, because if he's probably dying, like he's probably already on his way out. But there's always that situation where he might be in really big trouble and on the way out, but one wrong move and one spike of adrenaline, he's gone. So there's a very fine line between there's a very fine line between not allowing that adrenaline to come into play, but getting in there and getting that second shot, because you don't want it to be dragging on. You want it to be done quickly. That's the thing. We want this to be over as quickly and ethically as possible. So there's a real balancing act there a lot of the time.
It really is.
And, it's all of these things. No matter how, like shooting a bow or sharpening a broadhead, you can watch a few videos and you can get some training and some guidance and some coaching, and you can figure it out. You can learn how to do it and do it well. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about now, you can't just learn it in a tutorial or in a book. You need to see it and do it and live it and breathe it a fair bit to understand what is the appropriate course of action. And it just comes with time and experience. And that's just something that it's just, and that's how it would have been for all of our ancestors too. Like, it's just one of those things that you learn and you just get used to in terms of your dealings with these animals. So I think we've covered that fairly well, mate. I think we've sort of, there's probably other things we could mention, but I think that's gives people probably a bit of an idea of what to think about anyway.
Definitely. I think there's two parts to it. So I actually used to run a health and fitness business, and essentially we had a big part which was wellness in the workplace. So we'd go out to different workplaces and do these talks with them. And essentially one of the things we used to always talk about was up and down regulating your stress. So this is essentially what you do need to learn how to do if you want to be able to control your emotions and not dump so much adrenaline into your system in that point in time. And it's essentially, you can up and down regulate your stress based on what your vagus nerve or what your breathing is doing. So when you breathe through your mouth, when you're short, shallow breathing, when you're doing a lot of breaths in through your shoulders, it actually puts you into your stress response, right, into the fight or flight mode, versus when you can do a lot more nasal breathing, where you can activate your vagus nerve, which is the nerve essentially that sits between the brain and the heart. You can put yourself into a rest or digest state. And essentially there's ways by extending your exhale that you can calm your nerves back down. So in a situation, if you can remember, and the best thing to do is not practice it just in that moment, practice it before you get to that moment, but learning how to control your breathing, that's a really, really powerful tool that you can have in your quiver, essentially, when you're out in the bush. So a similar practice, or the best practice I always like to use and always like to teach, was just 4 seconds in and 8 seconds out. So you breathe in for 4 seconds through the nose, out for 8 seconds through the nose, and that breathing out slowly essentially just has to be double the time. So if you're doing 2 seconds in, 4 seconds out, even, that's enough to start to put you into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest or digest state. So that alone, and the reason why I kind of asked you about the regression before was because I actually did find myself, I had a bit of a regression on an animal where I got out there and I got really nervous about one of my shots I was about to take, and I had to really jump back into that system and down regulate my stress before I could even take the shot, because I was shaking like a leaf. I was like, what's going on here? It was just an interesting kind of play out as to how it all went. But That's actually a really handy tool for all the bow hunters. That's something that I shared in the bow hunters challenge I used to run as well, was like just learning how to down regulate your stress is so important. And it's not only for bow hunting. It's like if you're in an argument with someone, right, learn how to down regulate your stress, you can think more clearly. Yeah, any situation where you constantly kind of feel yourself tensing up and getting tight, that's just a great little breathing practice to have in place. The other side to what we were just talking about, though, is I think we kind of said at the start, but it's not a part of hunting that doesn't get shared that much. Like I think there's a lot of content kind of in the States because they are talking about shooting from the tree stand, getting that recovery shot in, or getting the recovery of the animal. But it is a part that's kind of, it's shied away from, because I think there is so much reason and connection and emotions that get put into animals. And so if that stuff is really shared a lot on the social media side of things, that's when we do start to get attacked. But at the same time, the whole reason why we're doing this as a podcast essentially is to help educate each other and really help with that situation of like, let's recover more animals essentially, right? Like it's really take your time, make sure you get your second shot where possible. If you need to, then back out completely. But most chances you are going to get a second shot, hopefully.
That's right. And yeah, I think if you look at the big picture, like if you look at the bigger picture in terms of the culture of not just bow hunting, but hunting in general, like the worldwide culture of modern hunting, the ethos behind quick kills and behind ethical shooting and humane dispatch of animals. Like if you look at the big picture, it's something that's just there ingrained into every bit of our culture. It's really hard for the anti-hunters to even conceptualize that or to have any understanding of it, because they just think we're just saying that because we're trying to protect ourselves. But as we know as hunters, and as all hunters understand, the vast majority of us in terms of the culture that we sit in, these things are really important and really hammered into us from all around us. It's only a very small, tiny percentage of real, what's the best word? What's the most political correct word? There's like, let's just face it, there's going to be idiots out there that don't subscribe to these things and that just take random shots and wound game here and there, like, and aren't being ethical about what they're doing. But they're a very small percentage of idiots, like there's only a very small percentage that are out there that are doing that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, they do a lot of damage for the rest of us. That small percentage of half-wits create a lot of sort of make life a lot tougher for the rest of us who are doing the right thing and trying to teach the right thing too, which is exactly what this podcast is doing in terms of sharing information and trying to teach people and trying to get better outcomes really for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think it's something that's got to be. It's not something that we go and speak about and publicly. We don't go and advertise the fact when we lose an animal. We don't go and whack it all over Facebook and say, "Oh, I went out hunting today and I hit a deer and it was a shit shot and I lost it." We just don't. It's just not what we do. We don't. I don't think it's something that should be particularly hidden, but it's not something that should be advertised and talked about openly because of the potential damage that it can do, and just because of the negative connotations that come with it for the people who don't understand hunting.
Definitely.
So it's a tricky one, mate. It really is. It's a tricky one. Yeah, there's not, and everyone's going to have a different opinion too. Like I'm not everything I've said isn't necessarily right. I'm just telling you what I think.
Based on your experiences, right?
Yeah, and everyone's going to have a different opinion on all of this stuff. So there's not really a perfectly right and wrong or black and white answer. But I think we've sort of covered what ethically what we should be aiming for, and I think it's really great that even in this modern era, that's still those ethics and what that perfection that we're aiming for is still really it's still really a focus, you know, like yeah. When I was young, we didn't have podcasts or anything like that, or the internet or anything like that. Like this stuff was just drummed into you by the hunters that were mentoring you. So it was just by personal communication and experience in the bush. So it was just hammered into you by all the people around you. There was no other way to learn anything.
It's a hard thing if you didn't have anyone around you that had those ethics then, right, as well. That's potentially when it breeds through. Yeah, it's interesting because it is such an emotional thing, right? Like, because we do aim for that perfection. Like, I've seen grown men cry for doing great shots. I've seen grown men cry for doing bad shots. Like, it's an emotional piece as to what it can do, and it really does pull on your heartstrings when you shoot an animal wrong, and the one thing you want is for that animal to pass quickly, right? Like, and then that comes out even more so in that moment. So I think in general, we're all wanting the exact same outcome. We never want to be a painful slow death or anything like that, and so hence why these conversations are important to have as well and share.
That's right. And when you really boil it down, this has been something that's been going on since the invention of the spear. So as soon as we figured out how to start throwing sticks at animals and trying to kill them with rocks and stuff, this started happening. And this is happening in nature every single day. Like, not in nature, not much gets away, but still, you still see the photos of, there's all sorts of stuff that goes on in nature every day where the predator doesn't quite finish off its prey, and it gets away, and it's not pretty. But that's nature. That's the world that we live in. We don't live in that's the real world that happens out there all around this fake society that we live in. That's what happens out in the real world every single day in the animal kingdom that we have convinced ourselves that we're not a part of anymore. But technically it's been happening since day dot, and that's not an excuse to not do our best.
No, definitely
that's just reality. That is the reality of what's going on here and what we are as a species.
Yeah, definitely. There's a Instagram account called Nature's Metal, and it's brutal. It just shows that stuff, right? All the stuff of either the predators preying and killing, or the predators not quite killing, and it's just it's pretty ruthless what happens, and there's no ethics in the animal world, that's for sure.
No, that's right. There's no ethics out there. Ethics are a thing. Ethics and the word humane is
a piece of reason.
A concept. It's something
exactly
that's created, and it's not like I disagree with it. I absolutely despise any intentional cruelty to animals. Like, when it's happening in nature, it still upsets me to see some things that go on. Some of the predators, what they get up to with young animals, and but that's just Mother Nature. Like, it doesn't get me, cruelty doesn't get me excited. It's not something that it's something that I just it's unsettling for me. Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Seeing a baby moose get ripped apart by a pack of wolves, or seeing an antelope with half of its intestines hanging out on the ground, sort of thing. Like, that doesn't turn me on. Like,
not at all. Yeah, I actually cringe most of the time when I'm watching that Nature's Metal. Like, I'll scroll past it pretty quickly. But I'm the same, man. I've always been an animal lover. Like, my dad was a vet, so growing up, we always had baby animals and different interesting animals. He was the Rocky Zoo vet at one point, so we got to go into the cage with the gorillas and stuff like that. Like, it was really cool what we had as a bit of an upbringing with that. And it's interesting to be a hunter, right, on the back end of it, in the sense of you would think that if you loved animals so much that you couldn't hunt them, but that's the whole part of it. Like, I love them so much that I want to be around them even more, and hunting gives me the ability to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that's the bit that, sadly, the people who are against hunting just can't. There's just no way they can get their head around that. They can't, and they never will.
No.
We can't expect them to either. We can't expect them to even like close to getting their heads around that. It's something only we will ever understand and be able to feel.
Yeah.
it's easy to feel that, but it's very hard to put into words, isn't it? It's very hard
Definitely.
to just go, oh, this is what it feels like. It's very,
Exactly.
very tough. Very, very, very tough.
The same reason why.
Between hunters, it's easy. Like what you and I know what
Yeah,
we're talking about.
definitely.
To non-hunters, that's a very, very tough thing to capture and to communicate. Yeah.
I was going to say it's probably same sort of concept for anyone here that's listening to say, well, now you're going vegan full time. It's like, what? That's just a bizarre concept, right? Like in our heads, that's a bizarre concept, but that's literally it's the role reversal in a sense. So,
That's right.
as a bit of a change of gears, mate. You hunted the Rusa deer on the season, right? That was the deer that you took on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you kind of delve a little bit more into Rooster? I know they tend to like the reason I bring this up is actually someone reached out to me on Instagram and asked about it. And I'm like, look, I'm very interested in hunting Rooster. I've hunted one rooster before, but it was a spiker that had attached itself to the cows. So literally all you had to do was find the cows and you found this rooster deer. And I know that's definitely not the case with most rooster deer, especially the good ones in the sense of the big boys and whatever else. From what I've heard previously, they tend to like really thick stuff. They tend to like bedding in really thick stuff and living in really thick stuff, but then they'll go out into the open. What can you kind of tell us about a rooster deer? Like a quick 101, I guess. If you've got a new block and you've got Rusa access, what would you do?
It's hard to decide what to really say in a quick 101. There's I'm not a rooster specialist, but I've hunted them a fair few times now, and I've had more success with rooster than any other animal I can think of. I've had a good very good strike rate with them for whatever reason, but I've hunted them probably in about I guess now probably 4 or 5 sort of different locations, and they're all quite different.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in Australia you've got like the primary sort of original herd down on the south coast of New South Wales, and that was sort of the first major release really, and a lot of there's a huge sort of historical hunting culture, and to me it's one of the most interesting cultures in Australian hunting is what's transpired around that south coast and the Wollongong and that sort of area. The type of hunter that's come out of there is quite a fascinating thing to me. But since those times, there's been a lot of releases in Queensland, as you know, and there's been other ones in like there's a few up in the NT, and there's bits and pieces. Like there's a few in WA even, and some in South Australia, and there might be the odd one in Victoria as well. But a lot of the rooster hunting happens in Queensland, so there has been a lot of releases up here. And like the habitats that they've been released into vary quite a bit. So they're not the properties that rooster have ended up on aren't all the same. They love water. They're not going to be like chital deer don't really necessarily hang around water. Like they're another tropical deer. Like they're an Asiatic deer that's from a tropical area. Chital deer don't wallow, for example, whereas rooster wallow. Rooster to me are like the pig of the deer world. They're really they're like a boar. Like the stags are like a boar with antlers a lot of the time. They're usually not far from water, so they love their creeks and rivers and swamps, and they like to wallow. They're very sort of aquatic in my view, whereas a chital deer is not something that's aquatic to me at all. It can be anywhere. During the like outside the rut, I've never really hunted them, so I don't really know what they're like. All I can go off is from what I've heard and read and stuff like that. But from anything I've heard, outside the rut in Queensland particularly, it's really not even worth your while. They just seem to disappear off the face of the earth, and they travel.
Wow.
They move a long way away from wherever the hinds are hanging out, because the hinds will sort of have a fairly established range where they live, and they might migrate in and out a little bit, but they've got a fairly like they kind of stay in that area, and often that will be like a particular property, or it may be a string of several properties associated with, say, a river or a watercourse. A little bit like chital. Like chital sort of do something a bit similar. Like especially your Far North Queensland chital are very property specific. So that there might be a cluster of properties that all have deer, but then there might be one and no other properties around that have deer, just that one. And then there might be several gaps of properties before the next one that has deer. So they're very focused on that sort of village arrangement. I think that comes from tigers. I reckon it's from the
true.
Into like tigers over the last several thousand years. And Rusa are a little bit like that, but not quite as much as Chital, in my opinion. They seem to be spread out a little bit more and not so concentrated on a homestead or on a property. So I think the rut's definitely the way to go. You want to be there in the rut. You want to be hearing them roaring. It is a spectacle.
And are you doing roaring back or calling back or anything like that? No.
No, I don't. I've never tried to call Rusa, and I just can't. I'm just trying to think if I ever heard of anyone doing it. I just can't think of. I'm sure people do it, and I'm sure there's all sorts of different answers to this, but I can't think of any of my mates who have ever called them. You can probably call them and get a bit of a reaction, but nothing like fallow and reds. It's not like that. You're not calling in. You're not just doing it like a doe call and making a stag come in. I've never seen that.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I haven't heard of any kind of calling or certainly not rattling or anything like that. They're so aggressive and they're just so like when the rut's on, they're all where the action is. So you'll often find there's just heaps of stags in the same spot wherever the main action is, and they're usually where they are. They're usually not hard to find. Like any place that I've been, it hasn't taken that much effort to find them and to look at many of them, to really be able to have a look at quite a few and before you sort of figure out, right, well, that's one that I really want to go after.
And they like fighting while they're hanging out? Like, what are they doing when they're just
they're very aggressive, yeah. They're very aggressive, and they will chill out and hang out together at certain points, but they really, really go hard when it comes to fighting. And their capes are usually, like, it's very rare to find a nice cape. They're usually so trashed, and their hair is their fur is so coarse. It's just very brittle. It's kind of a very brittle fur. There's two. There's one above me right here. Yeah, there's one just here, and he's missing whole sections of his, like, there's entire sections of bare skin on his shoulder where it's all just completely gone from his neck and shoulder. Like, he's covered in scars and that. So they fight full on. They really get stuck into it. And I think like in terms of, say, if you did have access to a property, or say you got an invite or whatever, I think you really want to focus on the peak of the rut. And for me, usually that's going to be, sort of, I've seen them go really well late June, but usually it's going to be the month of July and into August, and that does vary between area and between location. Like it's not going to be exactly the same on each property, and they might be roaring over here, but they might not be over here, and it's not like on one particular week they're all going off their heads, and it's going to vary a bit. You want to be there in July, or as close to as possible, and you're going to hear them. You're going to hear them roaring. Often you can't even sleep at night. Like, often it's a little bit similar to red. Sometimes they'll be right up there in the camp, just going off their heads. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to even get to sleep because they're so close in on the camp, just going off. And they're not a deer that's super. They seem to be fairly comfortable with humans, kind of thing. Like, they're quite comfortable, like, with farm work and machines and stuff like that going on. They seem to get quite used to that. But even though that may occur, it's still bloody hard to get close to them with a bow. Like, they're still a deer. Yeah, they're not stupid. They're still a deer, and they're still very tough to get a shot at. But to me, out of all the deer we've got, I think they're the most, in my opinion anyway, I think they're the most achievable deer to get with a bow if you've got a good spot to hunt. In my opinion, yeah. Like,
in what sense? What, they're a little bit easier, or like to stalk up on, or what?
I think the stats. I think if you look at the stats are going to be on your favor when it comes to Rusa, more than Chital and more than any of the others. Like, you're going to, if you're in good country where there's decent numbers of Rusa, you're going to put one down a lot quicker than you are a red or a fallow or a Chital or a Sam or a hog deer. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've only really ever hunted reds and fallow, and I feel that the fallow have been more forgiving in the sense that you can get away with a bit more compared to what the reds are. But I don't know if that's just because of the country that we're hunting. Like, no, I've hunted them. I've hunted them in a few different blocks, but they were fairly similar in the sense of what the layout of the land was. And I really felt like I could get away with a lot more with fallow. And a good example of this is like I shot a pig in a valley, and at the top of this ridge, not even a big ridge, like a small little ridge with trees lining the whole ridge line, there was probably like 100 fallow deer under there. Maybe not quite that many, like 60 fallow deer under there. I shot this pig in this valley, like within an earshot from them. We went down, we walked down, we followed this pig. We found the pig. We got some extra photos because we were doing this stuff with bushbuck. So we got these extra photos. We're looking up into the tree, and then we finally saw some fallow bucks like clanging and stuff. I heard them as we we're walking down, like there's definitely bucks over here. Then we saw them up in the ridge line, and then we stalked up on them and got pretty close before they actually even realized they actually winded us. But it was like, if that was a red deer, there's no way they would be hanging around on that ridge. And I'm not talking about a big hill, like it was small. So yeah, I don't know if it's just that situation in particular that really kind of stands out to me. It's not the only one that I can think of, but that's the sort of stuff I'm kind of thinking of or talking about.
Yeah. And it varies so much in terms of the country and the type of access you've got, and the like
if they're pressured and if they're not.
Yeah, there's a lot of different variables. I might have just been lucky in my life, but yeah, when you look at the stats, I've only hunted rooster. Like I've been on 6 specific rooster deer hunts. Like I might have been near them or around them or been in a spot where there's the odd one or whatever. But I've been on what I would say is six proper rooster deer hunts in my life. And I've shot 7 good stags in 6 hunts.
Yeah, wow.
If you look at Chiddle, I reckon I've been hunting Chiddle about 50 times in my life, and I haven't shot 10 good stags with a bow. I've mounted about 4, and I've probably shot about 6 that I would call like good stags.
That's
so
crazy.
you do the maths on that.
Exactly. It also excites me because I'm actually pretty pumped to go out and shoot a rooster. Like it's pretty high on my list, to be honest. Like rooster and chiddle are both up there for me because I mean, they're a lot more accessible here in Queensland in general, but I just like rooster. And actually rooster are really nice eating too. At least the one that I've had, they were incredible.
Yeah, I used to rate them at number 1. I'll probably put Chiddle just in front these days, but they're really, really good. And even a stag in the middle of the rut's absolutely fine. You know, like you can eat a fully rutted out stag and he's still going to taste really good. But no, there's something special about him, and there's something special about all of our deer.
Definitely.
There's just something. All of the 6 of them, there's not one of them you can sort of pinpoint and go, oh, that one's a bit boring, or it's just not very exciting. They're all so awesome, and they all
very
just
unique.
They're all just so fascinating and so cool in their own ways. And the thing that really I find really amazing is that the habitats that they've ended up in just seem to match them so well. Like when you see chiddle deer running around in those ironbark sort of forests up around Charters Towers, around the basalt wall, and that they look like those deer. It looks like those deer have been there since day dot.
Definitely blend in.
There.
Yeah.
You look at reds in the Brisbane Valley. You look at fallow down the New England Range. You look at sambar in the Victorian High Country. You look at hoggies down in the coastal country of Victoria. You look at all of those deer and where they sort of live, or their main areas, and they just seem to match it so well. And Rusa in central Queensland, in those sort of semi-arid sort of, like they're just meant to be there, eh? They just suit it so well in the spots I've been anyway. They just they're really just born to be put there. And there's still plenty of them out there. But there's not. They're a funny species. There's not a huge amount of access out there. You know, like it's nothing like the reds and fallow and probably chiddle to a degree. Like there's even guided hunts. Like there's not even that many guided hunts on offer at the moment. There's very few opportunities to even book a guided hunt. Even as an international hunter who's coming here from overseas, there's not even many outfitters who are offering like hunts in terms of like proper, like there's a couple of estate hunts, but in terms of real free range hunting, there's really a major lack of options at the moment.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, they're interesting. I'm very lucky to have a good mate who's he's got quite a good block, and it's a really nice property to go and visit, and I can't wait till next time. Well, that was where we filmed the season actually in 2021 with
Awesome.
my mate out near Emerald, and there's actually a family connection with you because I think it was your grandfather that released those deer, I'm pretty sure, or your great uncle or something. There's some connection
Really?
between you and
I
those
don't
deer.
know this.
Yeah, no, I don't
So
know if you realize that, but
Emerald's an interesting place because that's right next to where I grew up at Springshore, and I know actually. So this might be where the story kind of connects. My cousin actually, and it's not my actual first cousin. It's my mum's cousin's son. So essentially, my mum's cousin, that makes him my second cousin. I think when his son, it's like my third cousin. I don't know how it actually works out, but anyway, he came down and got his bow just recently. And he still is up in Springshore, and that whole situation was, he said that they've actually got deer out that way. He's got access to deer out at Emerald. So I wonder if that's the connection there, and there's something to that. I don't know. I'll have to ask him if he knows anything more about that.
you mentioned once in a previous podcast a bit. I'm sure it was your grandfather that had a collection of taxidermy, or it might have been your.
Yeah, so that's his granddad has a heap of taxidermy up there. Yeah,
that dude is the dude that released these deer, man, that we're talking about.
no way.
Yeah, no, we figured it out. Yeah, Shawnee and I figured it out. Yeah, he told me that. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Smaller world is, eh?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to ask. I'm gonna have to ask Tommy about that and figure that all out. That's very interesting. Doesn't surprise me. That sounds exactly like something he would do.
Yeah, no, that's what we've come to understand. Yeah, it's the same fella. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, Shawnee figured it out. He figured out we got the history on it and stuff. But yeah, no, they're an interesting. There's a lot of different bloodlines in Rusa too, and those ones like they're like there's some beautiful heads there and some beautiful stags, and they've got all the bits, but they don't. The genetics aren't there on that property to get really like what I call like they don't max out to that really huge size, like there are other properties where they do, where the genetics allow them to get up to that sort of pushing over that 36, 38-inch mark, and even up to possibly 40. Like there's certain genetics that got out there that produce these absolutely phenomenal heads, and probably the best in the entire world. But this property is not one of them. It seems to have had a bit of a mixture of other, just different genetics. And like they're a fascinating species because where they are from, like Rusa means, like in Bahasa Indonesian language, the word Rusa means deer. That is the word that means deer. And where Rusa from is from basically Indonesia. And what's Indonesia? It's a bunch of islands.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you move mammals onto different islands? They change.
Yeah.
And what's happened over a long period of time is that you've ended up with, like, I don't even know what the technical answer is. And I think there's a lot of opinions out there, and there's not a lot of actual scientific knowledge, but there is a lot of different subspecies of Rusa. Let's just say that there's a lot of different subspecies. There's one that we call the Javan Rusa, and it's from Java, right? And Java's a big island, so it makes sense that's where the bigger subspecies has come to exist. But there's a lot of other islands where they've been introduced to, both naturally, where they've swum to, and anthropogenically, where they've been introduced to. So you've ended up with all these different strains, and that hasn't really happened with any other type of deer. You look at something like a red deer in Europe, there's virtually no islands. Like obviously the ones on the British islands would have changed over time, but it's just one big landmass. So you've just got that genetic flow that's always sort of moving around into different reaches. But as soon as you move to an island, there's no genetic flow. That's it. What's there is there, and there's nothing being changed. So yeah, they're very interesting. There's, like, we talk about the Moluccan Rusa, and that's a fairly common term used in Australia. And potentially what we do have is they probably are Moluccan Rusa,
because that's kind of the two that most people say it here, right?
Yeah. We talk about Javan and Moluccan, and that seem to be the subspecies that have been accepted in Australian culture, and maybe that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bloke called Aaron Grant down in Wollongong who wrote a book on. He literally wrote a book on Rusa, and he did a lot of lot of investigation, a lot of research, and he's probably an authority on where the different strains have come from and what the different subspecies are. But there's a lot of gaps in the information, and I don't think there's a lot of actual. I don't think there's been a lot of actual genetic research into exactly what is what and where it came from and when it happened. So I think there's a lot of unknowns, and I'm sort of a bit fascinated at the moment because I've been in PNG working lately, and they do have a subspecies of Rusa up there on the Bensback, like on the Fly River and that Bensback area over to the up on the near the western border. And I'm sort of frothing a bit at the moment about the possibility of trying to organise a hunt up there. I think that'd be really cool to get up into PNG and try and nail one of their Rusa. And I've also lined up a trip with a mate up to Prince of Wales Island, up on the tip of Cape York, which is one of the heritage Rusa herds in Australia. Like they've been there for a really long time, and that's what everyone calls a Moluccan Rusa. And yeah, maybe they are, maybe they're not, maybe they're something else. But I'm really fascinated by them. They're definitely a much smaller Rusa than our Javas in Queensland and New South Wales. And I've also sort of had plans to. We're thinking about going up to Guam, which is an island just out in the absolute middle of nowhere between like the Philippines and Japan. There's a type of Rusa that lives there as well that's really extraordinary in its appearance and just a really cool looking deer. And we're hoping to get up there and go for a hunt and do a bit of filming up there at some stage as well. So that they just really fascinate me for some reason. Yeah, like there's a lot of different little strains and different subspecies and stories. As opposed to something like the Chittle that's just they're from India and Sri Lanka and they got brought to Australia and that's where they are. They're here, and then you've got them in Texas and you've got them in Hawaii, and they're virtually all the same. You know, like there's not a lot of. But the Rusa, there's a lot more
to them.
Yeah, there's a lot more
depth.
There's a lot more depth. Yeah, there's a lot more shit going on in the background. Yeah, so they are a fascinating animal. But
I had a plumber rock up to my house once, and he'd done a lot of hunting over in New Caledonia, hunting Rusa over there. And he's like, look, he just saw my bow. He's like, mate, you into hunting? I'm like, yeah. And we got talking. He's just telling me about all his adventures over there and stuff. But New Caledonia is only a small little place. I think it's three, maybe 2 hours away from Brisbane. Small little island off the side of Australia. And essentially, he's like, it's riddled with Rusa deer. And he went out, and what they do is at least the guys he was hunting with, they do the drives where essentially you send two people up the top of a range, walk them down, and then all of a sudden the deer are going to run to you. And so they do the run by and bang, do a little shot. So he's like, man, we would see hundreds of them each day. I don't know what the rules are for hunting over there, but he actually connected me with one of the guys. He's like, mate, take your family over there. Like he was a proper Aussie bloke. Like, mate, just take your missus over there. She can have fun on the beach, and you off hunting. How good's that? You can get connected with these guys. I started talking with them, but they don't speak. They all speak French, and they don't speak English very well. So the conversation didn't really go too far, unfortunately, but we've still tried to have more conversations, but at least I know it's there. So I actually didn't really look that far into it in the sense of what the hunting rules are over there, but it's something to look into potentially.
Yeah, you can definitely bow hunt there, and it's still a very popular destination for international hunters. Like there's international hunters there all the time during the rut, which right now that'd be flat out. You know, like there's a lot of action over there right now. And it used to be a really popular destination probably, I guess, 20 years ago and maybe 15 years ago. There was quite regularly a lot of different ads in the hunting magazines for outfitters that were operating over there. And
no way.
It sort of went downhill there for a period of time. And I don't know why exactly. I don't know whether it was overhunted a bit or whether the quality just went down for other reasons, but it just seemed to go off the radar a bit. But in the last few years, it seems to be back on the radar.
Yeah, okay.
There are a few good quality outfitters over there. There's one that's got a really good Instagram page actually, and I've been following them for a while now. And they just do a really good job on their social media, and they're shooting really nice stags and just some really good content on there. And it'd be a really cool. It's an international hunt. It's the closest international hunt you can do.
It's closer than New Zealand, right? Or
it's closer than New Zealand.
Depends on where you are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It is technically closer than New Zealand, and it's probably not technically closer than PNG, but PNG is a bit. There's no guided hunting there. There used to be an outfitter, but there's not really any sort of guided hunting that someone can just ring up and book. Whereas New Caledonia, there is.
Do you have
It's
a
not
connection with them
super cheap.
through some pursuits at all?
Yeah, I haven't sort of set up an agreement or anything yet because it's just not. It's just not a destination that's popular enough with my type of clients that I've sort of set it up yet. But if someone wanted to book something, yeah, I'll definitely be able to set it up. And that the outfitter that I mentioned, I would definitely set it up with them. I've had a little bit of contact with them, but I just haven't sent anyone there yet. But no, it is popular, and it's not over the top price, but it's just not cheap either. I think you're looking at sort of. I think they're charging about $6.5K US or something like that. So that's sort of nearly 10 grand for a Rusa hunt. And there's better options than that in Australia.
Definitely.
Even free range, like in Queensland. Excuse me, there's options that are going to put you in really good hunting for a lot less money than that in Queensland. But when you look at the overall picture and you look at the idea of going to a overseas country, and like I say, you could take your family to the beach and go fishing and explore like a little French island that's off the coast of Brisbane. It's something really interesting, yeah. But we don't do it. Not many Aussies go there.
No. Yeah, and when he said it, I'm like, where? Like I hadn't even really heard of it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mauritius is another awesome location for Rusa. Like it's a bit of a mecca. So New Caledonia, is definitely a Rusa mecca, and Mauritius off the coast of Africa is a bit of a mecca as well. They've got some really good Rusa there, and they shoot some really nice heads. But apart from that, really, there's really no Rusa hunting in the world. Like there's not. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. That's basically it. Australia, New Zealand. There's a very small population in New Zealand that you can hunt, but yeah, Australia's really the mecca for Rusa hunting in the world.
Is there much you can do over in Indonesia still?
I have never seen any outfitters operating there, but I know that some hunting goes on locally, and I don't know how legal it is.
Yeah, got you.
I do follow who's an Indonesian fella. I see him shoot pigs in that field like reasonably regularly, and they're definitely in Indonesia. So I don't. Most of the Asian countries, it's all forms of hunting are illegal.
Still under all like kingship and whatever else, right? Like it's very bizarre rules in general.
A lot of it's to do with Buddhism, I think, and Buddhism's very anti, very anti killing in general, like just killing animals or people or anything. So a lot of it comes down to religious beliefs, but yeah, what you'll find is sort of once you get basically below Mongolia, most of really all of Southeast Asia, there's not much hunting going on. There is in Malaysia, interestingly. There is, I know there's a guided operator that's guiding hunts in Malaysia, and you can hunt crocs and pigs and Rusa, and you can hunt goannas of all things. It's like quite a strange setup, and some other little mini deer species like mouse deer and stuff like that. But it's not cheap, and not many people. It's a pretty oddball sort of hunt to go to Malaysia. But Guam is an option. So there is a bow hunting scene in Guam, which is a really interesting thing, and that would be a really cool place to visit. Japan. There's hunting. Like there is some hunting that goes on in Japan, particularly with the locals.
What deer in Japan?
Sika.
Sika. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Big ass Sika. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So but generally there's not a lot going on in Southeast Asia. Yeah. But it would be interesting to know what's out there. Like in a place like Java, is there still giant Rusa stags running around there? It'd be really interesting to know what is out there. You know,
definitely.
Like what's running around out there in certain places that are just off the beaten track that no one ever gets to see, and certainly no one ever gets to hunt. There must be some spots out there that are just where there's some really amazing animals that no one can touch.
Definitely. I was thinking about it in regards to, and obviously it depends on where you are, but if you were in a situation that's starting to happen here in Brisbane where deer are becoming, they're starting to be heavily populated, especially in the outer regions of Brisbane in general. If you owned your own house block in Brisbane and a deer walked onto your block and you shot it with your bow and arrow, what's the go with that? Like, is it illegal in a residential area? What's the, like, I don't really understand, because there's obviously it's private property in that sense. You're not doing anything illegal because you're shooting your bow and arrow, which you're allowed to shoot on your private property. That's it. Yeah, I'd be intrigued what would happen.
Yeah. So if you look at the letter of the law, I can't remember exactly where we're at the moment. I know Rusa and Chiddle are definitely classed as class 2 pests under the Biosecurity Act. I can't remember if fallow and reds are or other deer species. I should know that, but I can't remember. I don't think reds have got to that status yet. But by law, in Queensland, like Chiddle deer and Rooster deer are exactly the same classification as a feral cat, a feral fox, and a pig. And you think about how much of a impact those 3 species have compared to deer. Legally and in terms of the law, they're classed exactly the same. What the law actually says is, you, as a landowner, you must take steps to control them on your land.
Yeah, wow.
It's not a case of you can shoot them if you want. It's a case of you, by law, must take action to control those species on your land. So even if a block is small, it is still technically a feral. And I don't like using that word. And there's a lot of discussion about this at the moment. What's a feral animal and what sort of words we should be using? And I know this gets some people fired up, but I'll talk from a scientific background. That's what I do for work. We need to use the term. Unfortunately, we're bound to the terminology that the law uses. We can use whatever words we want. We can say, they're this or they're that, but really, at the end of the day, it's the words that are written into the law that are going to carry weight. So the word feral is a word that's it's recognised, and that's what the lawmakers and the law writers use. I think most Australians would agree that the word feral in our context here is introduced. So we can say introduced or we can say feral. To me, they basically mean the same thing. It's non-native. So to me, those 3 things are the same: non-native, feral, and introduced.
Yeah.
When you say pest, that's when it starts to get different, because pest is a subjective word. Something that might be a pest to you may not be a pest to me. It might be something that, for example, there's going to be property owners in the Brisbane Valley who absolutely worship their deer, and they don't see them as a pest. And they see them as an asset, and they see them as a resource, and that's great. That's what we want. That's what hunters all want, is these deer to be seen as a resource. But the guy next door across the boundary fence that has no meaning to a deer whatsoever might see them as an absolute pest. So the word pest gets a bit more subjective. But anyway, a feral animal on your property, you're right to shoot with a bow legally, or in Queensland at this point anyway. So legally, it's not a problem. The problem is that with a small property, you're starting to get into pretty dicey waters when there's a chance that deer is going to get across a boundary fence with the wounded
very quickly. Yeah,
and this goes back to the conversation we had earlier about how, about animals, when things don't go perfect. If things do go perfect and you've got a perfect opportunity and it's a close shot, and you're 99.9% certain that thing's going to be lights out in 20 seconds. Well, yeah, you're probably going to be able to make it happen 9 times out of 10. But that one time when it doesn't go to plan and that deer runs off with an arrow in it and it jumps a boundary fence and then it's in the next door neighbors with an arrow in it, that's when shit's going to really get
looks bad very, very quickly. Yeah.
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 So that's the problem with small properties is it's not the legal side of it. It starts to move into it's a grey area as soon as that animal's onto the next door property because they might just absolutely despise hunting and they might call the newspapers and call the RSPCA and make a massive deal out of it. And all of that happening is not worth you shooting one deer with your bow. Definitely. It's not even a millionth. So it's a really hard one to.
It is because it's kind of like you have a rat in your block, you trap it and you're all good. You can't necessarily trap a deer and be all good then in that situation.
Even with a rifle, like it starts to get dicey even shooting rifles on those smaller blocks because you're going to create a lot of there's going to be some idiot down the road that brings the cops and says, "Oh, this bloke's a threat to our safety," or whatever. Like there's more and more idiots out there every year, and there's more and more people who are sort of going to create an issue and create a scene. So my view on it is on those small blocks, like I can't really say I support it, to be honest. In those fringe parts of Brisbane, it's cool that there's deer running around there, and it's cool that some people might get some opportunities, and especially on bigger blocks where you've got a bit more space to play with. But just in general terms, on smaller blocks where they're running around the suburbs and that, I can't really support that.
Definitely, yeah. I actually got offered through a friend to go onto a 10-acre block, and I had the same sort of thoughts, right? Like it's very easy for a deer to run 50 meters after you take a shot. And then what happens if the neighbor is an absolute lover? That's their pride and joy every morning. They wake up, they have their cup of coffee, and you've just shot Stanley. What happens then?
They might feed him. There might be someone next door that's feeding him. And I think sometimes even though it's very hard, particularly when we're young and we're trying to get runs on the board, sometimes we've got to take a step back and go, is my
desire
and my potential, my ultimate potential outcome here, is it really worth the alternative, which is potentially this? Newspapers and photos and public uproar. Like sometimes we've got to take a step back and really try and make a logical decision about what is it really worth it? Is it really worth it? Because sometimes it's not, and it's happened many times already where people in these semi-urban areas have ended up in the paper, and that every time that happens, it's eroding our future, our
mass damage to our whole community.
That's right. Yeah. So one deer for one person it's not worth that loss each time. So I think there's just got to be a bit of common sense, like, and of course there's going to be exceptions to every rule, but myself, I can't say that I would, my advice to people would be, just don't worry about it. Just leave them be and use it as an opportunity to get game camera photos and even stalking practice, or just be around the deer. But actually putting an arrow in one, I don't think it's ever going to be worth it. I think it's better to go and find somewhere else where you've got a bit more space to play with and the deer are a bit more wild.
Yeah. No, I agree. With that, mate, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining me again for round 2. It's been a lot of fun. My platform's always your platform if you ever want to come back on whenever you're ready. Once you've got through your busy few months, I mean, you've got a pretty hectic 6 months coming up, so maybe we can do a bit of a recap after that. That could be pretty cool.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. Yeah, let's have a yarn. Like around
exciting
Christmas
stuff.
Like early in the new year or something like that. Yeah, that'd be, because there is some pretty crazy stuff happening this next 6 months. So I'd love to share a few yarns with you. Yeah, particularly Russia would be a cool one to
be amazing here about.
Chat about. And yeah, mate, anytime. It's really great talking to you. And as I said last time, it's awesome to see the job that you're doing, and you're really providing a real service to the bowhunting community in what you're doing. So we all are thankful for what you're doing, mate. It's not just
thanks, mate.
It's not just the people who are learning from your podcast. It's really a service to the whole community. So we all should be grateful that someone that's had the nous to go ahead and create something like you have, and yeah, you've got the support of everyone as far from what I can see, and so good on
I
you.
appreciate it, mate. Yeah, it's been a great resource for me, but also it's just cool to see how many people it is helping. Like that constant outreach that I get is it's nice. Like even if it's just a question like, hey, what do you think about this? Like I'm always happy to give that little 2 cents, because really that was kind of the reception that I got from the bow hunting community. So it makes sense in my eyes, but also I just get a lot of joy out of it, right? Like it's nice to be able to just talk about your hobbies and then have some of these deeper conversations in general. And sometimes it doesn't happen unless you put headphones and microphone on in front of someone. So yeah, it's nice. I enjoy it, and I think yeah, I'm just as grateful. So thank you.
No worries, mate. No, it's good to have you on. We'll do it again.
Indeed. Oh, actually, before we peel off, what's your Instagram again? Just at Ben Salleras?
The correct one, I've got a backup account because I got hacked and had traumas earlier this year. So the real active, the normal active one is just at Ben Salleras. Yeah, just first and last name. Yeah, I've got a backup account that's got an underscore between Ben and Salleras, but it doesn't get used. But I still see people tagging stuff and whatever, and I'm just like, yeah, well, that's not really the right one. But yeah, Silent Pursuits is the other one, and that's just at Silent Pursuits, just one word. Silent Pursuits is yeah, if anyone's looking at booking a hunt anywhere in the world, Australia or New Zealand or anywhere in the entire world, just yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. And there's plenty of cool stuff happening in that space at the moment. Lots of exciting hunts that are yeah,
all
on the
open back
agenda
up,
on the
right?
horizon.
And it's perfect time to go right now. Well, it is kind of like fresh grounds again.
Yeah, yeah, like everything's sort of settled down post COVID, and sort of people, the backlog of hunts is sort of out of the way mostly now, and or definitely will be this year. And yeah, there's just always exciting stuff going on. Like there's always cool stuff out there, and like I often say, there's a lot of things there are a lot of hunts out there that are really amazing experiences that are affordable to everyone. There are a lot of hunts that are expensive, but there are a lot that are very affordable to absolutely anyone who's willing to save a few grand and put a little bit away and save up one of those lifetime experiences. So yeah, no, I'm always there. There's plenty of thing in that space, and it's not looking like slowing down anytime soon. So yeah, always free for a chat. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, thanks, mate. Appreciate your time.